My name is Qajaq Robinson. I am a non-Indigenous woman who was born and grew up in the Nunavut territory. When I was born, my parents named me Evelyn. That lasted a day or two from what I understand. After returning back to the community of Igloolik, an elder, Tatigang approached my parents and told them that I was to be named Qajaq after her late brother, as is the law according to Inuit naming practices and laws. Ever since I've been Qajaq, I only get called Evelyn by bureaucrats or dentists or pharmacists who see that name first. And being named Qajaq has had a tremendous impact on who I am. It's been a tremendous gift. Through my name, I have relationships. And through those relationships, I've come to understand my role and my responsibility. Particularly my role and my responsibility as it relates to reconciliation, as it relates to my role as a non-Indigenous woman. My journey has led me to become one of the commissioners on the historic national inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. For the last close to 3 years, I've been in this role, and it's been a tremendous honor. And being a non-Indigenous woman, receiving the truths and the stories of families and survivors has been truly humbling and has been an eye-opening experience for me. They've taught me so much more about my role and my responsibility as a non-Indigenous person in reconciliation, in rectifying the wrongs of our history and what continues today. And I want to share with you some of what they taught me, because I think that what I've learned may help you. As Canadians, we are a little bit self-righteous. It's the truth. We pride ourselves on being a just and principled society, bound by the rule of law, respectful of human rights, and respectful of human dignities. We see ourselves as champions on the international stage. We go to the UN and we talk about all the amazing things that we do. Yet the fact remains that our country's track record when it comes to recognizing the rights and the human dignities of Indigenous peoples is appalling. We need to look at who we are as a country, and we need to go way back. In 1867, Canada became a country. It was no longer a colony. However, we all have to come to recognize that although we were an independent nation, no longer a colony, that wasn't the end of colonization. What happened was a passing of power from the British Crown to the Canadian Settler Society. Since then, so much has continued unchecked. The ideologies of the systems and the institutions created through colonization persist. The disregard for the humanity and the rights of Indigenous peoples, upon which colonialism depends, persists. I want to acknowledge that Canada has come a tremendously long way. We are a state with robust laws, robust frameworks that recognize our human rights, that create systems and tribunals to have recourse when those rights are violated. We also recognize Indigenous rights through our Constitution and now through signing on to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Unfortunately, the reality remains that much of this is on paper. We don't walk the talk that we spew on the international stage, even within our own society and at our own tables. You are probably familiar with a lot of the historic violations. The residential school, the 60s scoop, the establishment of reserves, the institution of the pass system, the forced relocation and coerced relocation of multiple communities, even within this province. This is something that has hit the public stage in the last few years through through numerous reports. But I want to talk to you about how these violations continue today and how they happen at such personal levels. I received permission to speak of this story from my friend Audreys. I want to recognize and thank her for giving me permission to share her experience, because I think it really outlines what the denial of Indigenous humanity looks like on a daily basis. My friend Audrey lost her sister a couple months ago under tragic conditions. Audrey and her sister were Musqueam women from Vancouver. Audrey is a medicine woman. She's a keeper of knowledge, and she has roles in her community and within her society in accordance with her laws. When her sister passed, she had obligations to perform ceremony and lay down medicines to ensure that Maria could transition into the next world properly. We've all lost loved ones. We know how important those ceremonies are, whether it's in temples or churches or in our own homes. The struggle Audrey had to find the space to perform ceremony shocked me. Due to the policies and the processes that were permitted in the morgue and in the crematorium, she couldn't do any of it there. What she ended up having to do in the parking lot of the morgue, between the transfer of Maria's body from the morgue to the crematorium, on a slab of metal on top of concrete, was the only space she was given to respect the dignity of her sister and to uphold her laws as a medicine woman of the Musqueam Nation. That's what the denial of human rights looks like, of Indigenous rights, what that looks like at a very, very personal level, and that's happening today. It's also happening on a political level. And this we see right in front of our eyes. Throughout the year, CBC, CTV, everybody gathers around politicians in one of our major cities for federal, provincial, and territorial meetings, for First Ministers' meetings, where our nation's leaders at the tables of power set our priorities and set the agenda. If Indigenous peoples are included at this table, they're tokenized and marginalized. They are there to give a talk over breakfast or maybe lunch. They are treated like a sideshow. They aren't at that table. And what we have to recognize is that that is by design. No one would accept if the Premier of Quebec was not permitted at that table. That would be a violation, and no one would stand for it. Yet our Constitution and our Confederation legitimizes this exclusion. Colonial ideologies continue, and this systemic exclusion of participation and the violation of rights is fully backed by our state. The truth is, acknowledging Indigenous peoples have a place at that table, at the tables of power, would represent the recognition that those that currently hold the power, our federal, provincial, and territorial governments, do so to a degree illegitimately. So what does that teach us? It means that our systems of governance, our systems of law, and our systems of power, as they stand right now, depend on the continued subjugation of Indigenous peoples. We have to start collectively rejecting this understanding of who we are as a nation. We need to deconstruct it. In effect, the work that needs to be done is decolonization. And the people that need to do it more than anyone else are non-Indigenous peoples. It's not up to Indigenous peoples to do the decolonizing work for us. It's work that we have to do. So the nothing to something that I want to see and that I want to share with you is this idea of deconstruction. Let's create nothing in order to create a new something. The creation of nothing is the decolonizing work of our systems that we all need to be a part of. That heavy lifting we need to be doing. Because the truth is, and what I've learned after talking to hundreds of families across this country, is that the something we have right now, it's beyond unjust. It's killing people. It is killing Indigenous women and girls and gender diverse peoples. And we have to start recognizing that this is not an Indigenous people's problem. This is our problem. The social, economic, cultural, and political hardship that Indigenous peoples face in this country is by design. It's due to their social, political, economic, cultural oppression and marginalization, which was the absolute objective of colonization. It's not an accident. And it's up to us to do the work. We need transformative change. We can't be tinkering with what we've got. Tinkering with the something we've got will not create the nothing we need. The Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, as well as the National Inquiry's interim report, all called for this transformative change. And they talked to us about what that needs to look like and how we get there. And it's through the disruption and deconstruction of our colonial systems. What we've learned from RCAP and the TRC is that the failure to uphold the rights and the human dignities of Indigenous peoples is a matter of life and death. What we need moving forward is true partnership, true responsibility anchored in relationship. We are all related. And as Senator Murray Sinclair said when he was sitting on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we are all treaty people. We are all part of this relationship, and we all have roles to play and responsibility. So again, what can you do? What can I do? It may sound quaint, but education is such an important first step. And we don't need to depend on our institutions of education to teach us anymore. After this, turn your cell phone back on and Google. Google the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report. Google the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. The answer's in there. I also call on you to listen and learn, particularly to the stories and the lived experiences of those who've lost their loved ones to violence. The testimonies before the National Inquiry were powerful. Often people ask me, how do you listen to all those horrific stories? But what I heard and what was shared time and time again was raw truth and real solutions. And it's in that truth that I think we have our guides, and we need to let their voices guide us forward. It's a hard thing to swallow. It's the hard thing that I've had to come to understand and swallow, that our position and place is maintained by the oppression of others. That isn't a comfortable place to be. It's not a comfortable place to acknowledge. But our systems of law and justice and governance are built upon these values of colonialism, of racism and sexism. And so long as we're ignorant, and so long as we don't demand action, we blindly prop them up and maintain them. And we maintain the colonial violence that Indigenous people face and experience daily. We need to come to a point, and we need to do it urgently, where we challenge our assumptions and our understandings. What is the root of our laws? What are the roots of our policies? Why do we do the things that we do? What is the legitimacy of our authority? My power in place, I hold it. Why? What puts me here? What keeps me here? Am I the right person in this role? Recognizing that much of the authority, in many ways, is right now in the wrong hands, especially when it comes to the lands and the waters and the lives of Indigenous peoples. part of what we all need to do is to recognize that our laws and our governance right now are taking up all the space. There isn't the space for Indigenous peoples to exercise their rights to a large degree in this country, even if we recognize those rights. We need to start actively vacating space that's not ours to allow for Indigenous peoples to take their rightful space. When I think about the something that we need to collectively create, to me, it is a space. It is a space where the legal, political, and economic space that Indigenous peoples need to exercise their rights is created. And we as citizens of this country need to call on that space being created, and we need to keep that space for Indigenous peoples. This leads to the next issue that continues to be an obstacle: political will. I can't tell you how many people came up to me and said, oh, you're doing another inquiry, you're doing another commission. What are you going to learn different from the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples? What are you going to learn that we haven't learned already? The number one thing that I've learned is that what is happening is because people are doing nothing. It's because governments aren't acting. It's because there isn't the political will, and we as citizens need to force the political will into the right directions. So we hold our leaders accountable. We have to. And we have to demand action. And they can't say they don't know anymore. The Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women were commissioned by our governments. They asked for the knowledge, they asked for the wisdom, they asked for the solutions. It's been given. They know. Now we must make them act. We also need to ensure that the space at the positions of power are created for Indigenous peoples. The solutions that are required cannot be undertaken unilaterally by our government. True partnership is required. As was shared with me often during the inquiry, an overarching principle that must echo through every hallways of power in this country is not about Indigenous peoples without Indigenous peoples. And I believe that's fundamental. And we can push our leaders, we can push our governments to create and maintain that space. Because right now, we have to acknowledge that what is occurring, the structure of our governments, the way decisions are made, is propped up by the oppression of Indigenous peoples. It's a hard position to be in, to think about being in a position of power and place that's propped up by oppression. But the dismantling of these institutions and these systems of oppression are going to require tremendous personal and collective reflection, and a hell of a lot of discomfort, and a hell of a lot of uncertainty. I have felt that personally, but I welcome it, because we cannot accept the status quo anymore. Because our discomfort in this process pales in comparison to the daily oppression that Indigenous peoples face and the pain of losing loved ones in a society where there is no tears shed at that loss. We can all do better. We can create nothing to create something. Thank you.